Hi, Elaine here from markergeek.com. I don't normally do voiceovers for the Stamping Bella release colouring videos, but I thought I would on this one, just to give you some quick tips about how I approach colouring the beards on the adorable gnomes that have been released recently, as a few people had asked. Maybe if you're finding all that open space a little bit intimidating if you're new to colouring or just not used to colouring this sort of image. Hopefully this will help you out a little bit to get started. As you'll be able to see up in the top left corner of the video when I start colouring the beards in a minute, I used a selection of 3 cool grey markers, C00, C1 and C3. This combination of markers will end up looking more grey or more white depending on how much of the colours you use and what the colours are around the gnome, what colours you use, the stronger colours you use for the outfit and in the background will make the beards pop more as white, or leave them looking kind of slightly grayer. It really depends on what you're looking for. I often use this combination of markers for colouring Father Christmas's beards on Christmas images, etc., and also for colouring snow and clouds. As far as approaching colouring the beards, as you can see, I took the lightest shade first, the C00, and kind of mapped out where I wanted to put some of the strokes, kind of trying to figure out how the strokes were going to work with the shape of the beard, and kind of where I wanted to start placing them. I do it in the lightest shade because it's easy to cover up if I do something that I think, oh, that doesn't look quite right. And then the key to this is really layering and going back and forth and building up kind of random strokes throughout the beard, trying not to make them too uniform, trying to space them out a little bit. You don't need to fill the whole area with tiny little strokes. You're really just trying to give the suggestion of hair and texture. Initially it will look a little bit weird and a little bit straggly and strange, but as you layer the ink and sort of blend some of the areas out and soften it, it will start to look pretty good. It's one of those things with colouring is it generally tends to look a little bit weird, but you have to keep working at it. So don't just start layering down a little bit of colour and think, oh, you know, it doesn't look quite right. Beard hair isn't perfect, like hair isn't perfect in real life. So if you make a little mistake, say your pen slips and you put a line where you don't really like it, or you didn't think there should be a line there, or it's kind of not quite the right shape of line, like you made it too straight, you really just need to work with it and keep going. When you have finished, really it's the overall effect that people will see, not that one kind of misplaced line, especially since you can kind of work with it and kind of extend things and cover things up. Certainly nothing about the beards that I'm colouring here was perfect, but overall I was pleased with the effect in the end. I like to add the areas where you can see there's a little bit more, like the lines have connected and there's a little bit deeper shading, to give the suggestion of sections of hair that have kind of come together and sort of created shadows underneath. I find that works really well for the overall effect rather than trying to colour lots of individual hairs. This technique also applies really to colouring fur on animal images, and also is really similar to colouring just hair in general. What you really don't want to do is to create too many lines that are straight. So if you had all the lines going straight down in a very uniform way, that would look quite weird. So you want to vary where your strokes start and stop, and also try and curve them to go with the shape of the beard as it's drawn. On these images, our artist Crystal has included some kind of suggestion lines, so you can kind of, with the outer line, the outer edge of the image, you can get some suggestions from that as to where you might want to put some lines. And also sort of there are a few little detailed lines that can help you with some ideas on where to build up some shadow and create lines, which is quite helpful. You can kind of ignore those a little, as they just kind of add to the overall effect themselves anyway. I just tend to start colouring and work them in as and when I feel like it. So I might just add just a little bit of extra shadow around, sort of underneath those lines, and build lines up around it. I don't tend to focus on them. I use them more as kind of like a helpful suggestion. And the other thing to remember is that it's important to leave a fair amount of white space to preserve those sort of white areas. If you're going for an overall sort of light grey or white effect, leaving in a lot of white is going to help with the overall effect. And also make sure to use some of the darker shade to add a shadow underneath the nose to separate it out from the beard, to make it stand in front, because these little guys have got kind of giant noses which look really cute. Another way to approach colouring the beards, because obviously there's never just one way to do something, would be, instead of creating strokes to create a hair-like texture like this, you could make it more of a fluffy, curly, cartoony beard by using sort of like a dabbing technique to build up texture that way, similar to how you might colour one of the Stuffies images, one of the sort of plushy teddy images. That could look quite good. And really the key is take some tips, have a look at how I and maybe some other people have coloured the images, and then go away and practice. There are plenty of new gnomes in the current release to practice on, and they all have these huge beards to try and practice out some of the techniques and the tips. And you'll see in a minute, when I start colouring the hats and the other little bits that you can see of their clothing, how the colour of the beard kind of brightens up a bit next to the darker colours. And that's really it. I hope you found some of my waffle useful. If you have, please like and subscribe, and visit the blog link in the description for more details. I've sped up the footage for the rest of the colouring after I finish colouring this beard, and I'll pop on some music for you. Thank you for joining me, and I'll catch you next time.